Hey everyone, this is Jungkook. Before we start, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your country in the comments below. It always amazes me to see how far my words can travel, how a single story told from my heart can somehow reach people I've never met, people living in corners of the world I may never step foot in, yet still feel connected to me in ways I can't fully describe. That connection is the reason I'm here speaking today. Because this isn't just my story, it's a story I believe many of you will understand deeply. And I need you to know it, even if it makes me look vulnerable, even if it makes me look weak, even if it shows a side of me that isn't polished or perfect. Because sometimes the truth, no matter how painful, is the only way to grow. I never thought I would be sitting here saying these words, but I did it. I proposed to someone. I looked her in the eyes. I opened my heart. I asked her to spend her life with me, and she rejected me. Those words might sound shocking, maybe even unbelievable. Jungkook rejected? The same person you see on stage with millions of fans screaming his name. The same guy with cameras flashing every time he steps outside. The same face that fills billboards and fashion campaigns rejected. Yes, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, because sometimes what you see on the outside isn't the same as what's really happening inside. The truth is, no matter how much success you achieve, no matter how much love the world pours onto you, rejection still cuts just as deep. It still reminds you that you're human, that you're not invincible, that your heart can break in the most ordinary and quiet ways. I want to take you back to the beginning of this story, because it didn't happen in the middle of some glamorous night. It didn't happen under stage lights. And it didn't happen in the middle of one of those picture-perfect romantic moments you see in movies. No, it started in silence. It started in one of those nights when you're alone with yourself, when the room feels too big and the noise of the world fades away. I had just come back from weeks of schedules, rehearsals, flights, interviews, the kind of weeks where you don't even realize you're exhausted until you stop moving. And when I finally stopped, when the cameras weren't clicking and the music wasn't playing, what I felt wasn't relief. It was emptiness, a hollow echo in my chest that kept whispering, "You've given so much to the world, but who is giving to you?" That's when she came into my life. Not as someone dazzling, not as someone chasing me, not as someone impressed by the fame or the spotlight. She came in quietly, almost unnoticed, like a song you don't realize you've been humming until the melody lingers in your mind. She wasn't from my industry. She wasn't someone who cared about headlines or rumors. She was just real. Real in a way that felt almost foreign to me, because for years my world had been curated, filtered, staged, edited. But she lived in the present moment. She noticed small things. She paid attention to details about people that most would ignore. And when she spoke, she didn't fill the silence with empty words. She chose them carefully, each one carrying weight. Each one showing me that she wasn't performing, she was just being. I still remember the first time we had a real conversation. It wasn't about fame or music or schedules. It was about something simple, something most people overlook. She said, "The way you treat people when nobody's watching is who you really are." At first, I thought it was just one of those phrases you hear floating around in motivational quotes. But the way she said it, with calm conviction, like it was a truth she had tested in her own life, it struck me. And maybe it hit me harder, because deep down, I wondered if I was living by that standard. Was I really the same Jungkook off stage as I was on stage? Or had I built two versions of myself, the one the world celebrated and the one who felt empty in the quiet? That conversation stayed with me. And it wasn't just words. Over the weeks I watched her, I noticed how she carried herself. She remembered names. She asked questions that showed she was listening. She gave her time to people who couldn't offer her anything in return. And slowly, I found myself admiring her, not because she was perfect, but because she was consistent. Her character wasn't built on appearances. It was built on choices, daily choices that most people never notice. But that revealed who she was becoming. I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. A pull. Not towards her beauty, though she was beautiful, but towards her way of seeing the world. It was like looking into a mirror that showed me not just who I was, but who I could be. And the more time we spent together, the more I realized I wasn't just interested in her. I was being changed by her. She challenged me without trying. She inspired me without preaching. And before I knew it, I was imagining a future where she was by my side, not as a dream, not as a fantasy, but as a partner. That's when the idea of proposing entered my mind. It wasn't sudden, like an impulse. It grew slowly, like roots digging deeper into the soil, until you realize the tree has already been there, quietly forming its foundation. I started noticing the little signs, the way my heart calmed when she was near, the way laughter came easier, the way I didn't feel the need to be Jungkook the idol, but could simply be Jungkook the person. And I thought, maybe this is what love really is. Not the fireworks, not the drama, but the quiet certainty that you've found someone who makes you want to be better, not because they ask you to, but because being with them brings out the best in you. But here's where the story takes a turn, because in my heart, the certainty was clear. I loved her, I wanted to share my life with her. But love, as I've come to learn, isn't always a two-way street. Sometimes, no matter how much you feel, the other person doesn't or can't feel the same. And that's the part of this story I need to share with you. Not because it makes me proud, but because it makes me human. Because behind every glamorous picture you see, behind every performance, behind every smile, there are stories of heartbreak that never make it into the headlines. When the moment finally came, when I looked her in the eyes and opened my heart, I truly believed the answer would be yes. I had built up the courage. I had replayed the words in my mind 1,000 times. But what came after wasn't the fairy tale ending I imagined. It was rejection. Not cruel, not harsh, but gentle. And in some ways, that made it even harder. Because when someone rejects you with kindness, you can't hate them. You can't even blame them. All you can do is face the truth. Love, no matter how powerful it feels in your heart, still requires two souls choosing each other. And she didn't choose me. Part of me wanted to run from that pain, to hide it, to cover it with work, with schedules, with the comfort of knowing that millions of people still cheer for me. But another part of me knew I had to sit with it. I had to let myself feel it fully, because maybe there was something to learn here. Maybe rejection wasn't the end of the story, but the beginning of understanding myself in a deeper way. So this is where the story begins, and this is what I'll be sharing with you. Not just how I proposed, not just how I was rejected, but why. The reasons behind her no. The lessons hidden inside that painful word. Because sometimes rejection reveals more about love, about life, and about ourselves than acceptance ever could. And as painful as it is, I believe sharing this with you might help someone out there who's going through the same thing. When I tell you that rejection changes the way you see yourself, I mean it in the deepest way possible. For so long, I thought I understood what love was. I thought it was about giving everything I had, showing up, being vulnerable, opening myself completely. But when she said no, when she looked at me with those kind but firm eyes, I felt something I wasn't prepared for. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was the realization that maybe I had misunderstood what she needed. Maybe I had been so focused on how I felt that I forgot to ask whether she felt the same. And that realization hit harder than the rejection itself. I replayed that moment over and over in my mind. The way my heart was racing, the way my hands trembled as I pulled out the ring, the way I said the words as honestly as I could, like my life depended on it. And then the silence, the long pause that felt like an eternity before she spoke. She didn't laugh, she didn't turn away, she didn't make it cruel. She simply said, I can't. Those two words shattered everything I had built in my head. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to argue. I wanted to convince her. But the way she said it, gentle, steady, almost like she had rehearsed it, told me this wasn't a decision made in the moment. It was something she had thought about, something she had wrestled with long before I asked the question. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, the ring still burning in my pocket, the weight of it heavier than anything I had carried on stage. I kept asking myself the same question. Why? Was it me? Was it the life I live, the schedules, the chaos, the attention? Was it my flaws, the parts of me I try so hard to hide from the world? Or was it simply that her heart was somewhere else, in a place I couldn't reach, no matter how hard I tried? The questions spun around in my head until they became unbearable. And in that unbearable silence, I realized something important. Rejection forces you to confront truths you've been avoiding. It forces you to see yourself not as you wish you were, but as you really are. Over the next few days, I tried to go about life as usual. Rehearsals, recordings, interviews. I smiled, I performed, I answered questions. But inside, I was carrying a storm. And I knew I couldn't keep it bottled up forever. So I went back to her, not to beg, not to plead, but to understand. I needed to hear the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Because sometimes, the only way to heal is to face the wound directly. When I asked her why she rejected me, she didn't avoid the question. She looked me straight in the eyes, the same way she always did when she was being honest. And she said, "Because I can't give you what you need." At first, I didn't understand. I thought love was enough. I thought my feelings, my devotion, my promise to give her everything I had, that should have been enough. But then she explained. She told me that my life, the one the world sees, the one that looks glamorous and exciting from the outside, is not the life she could step into. She told me that she admired me, she respected me, she even cared for me deeply. But she also knew herself. She knew her limits, her boundaries, the kind of life she wanted to live. And that life wasn't one lived in the shadow of constant cameras, rumors, pressure, and expectations. It wasn't a life where her private world could never truly remain private. And it wasn't a life where she would always feel second to the demands of my career. Hearing those words hurt more than I can describe, but they also forced me to respect her honesty. Because she could have said yes and walked into a future she wasn't ready for. She could have chosen me out of fear or guilt or because the moment felt too overwhelming, but she didn't. She chose truth over comfort. And as much as it broke my heart, I realized that kind of courage deserves respect. She didn't reject me because she didn't value me. She rejected me because she valued herself enough to know what she could and couldn't handle. And in a strange way, that made me love her even more. But love doesn't always mean possession. Sometimes it means letting go. Sometimes it means recognizing that the person who changes your life isn't meant to stay in it forever. Sometimes it means accepting that the story you wanted to write together has to end before it even begins. And that acceptance is one of the hardest lessons I've ever had to learn. In the weeks that followed, I kept thinking about her words. "I can't give you what you need." They echoed in my mind, not as an accusation, but as a reminder that love isn't just about what we feel. It's about timing. It's about compatibility. It's about two lives aligning in ways that make growth possible. And sometimes, no matter how much you want it, those pieces don't fit. No amount of love can force them to. I began to see that maybe rejection isn't always about failure. Maybe it's about redirection. Maybe it's life's way of saying, not this path, not this time. And while that doesn't erase the pain, it gives it meaning. It makes you realize that heartbreak isn't wasted if it teaches you something about yourself, if it pushes you to grow in ways you wouldn't have otherwise. I started to ask myself new questions. Not, why didn't she love me? But, who am I becoming through this? Not, why wasn't I enough? But, what do I need to learn about love, about myself, about what truly matters? Those questions didn't make the pain go away, but they gave me a direction. They gave me a way to turn heartbreak into growth. And here's the part I need you to hear, the part I wish someone had told me earlier. Rejection isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of a new chapter you didn't see coming. It's a mirror held up to your soul, showing you where you still need to heal, where you still need to grow, where you still need to practice becoming the person you hope to be. And as painful as it feels in the moment, that kind of growth can only happen when you're brave enough to face it. So yes, I proposed. Yes, I was rejected. And yes, it broke me. But it also opened my eyes. It reminded me that love is not something you can demand or expect. It's a gift, freely given, and it has to be mutual. And when it isn't, the most loving thing you can do is let go with grace. When I think back on the days after her rejection, it felt as though the world had split into two realities. On one side, there was the world everyone saw, the lights, the music, the cheers of thousands of fans, the polished version of Jungkook who never faltered, who always smiled, who seemed untouchable. And on the other side was the reality I lived in when the cameras turned away, the silence, the heavy ring still hidden in my drawer, the weight of words I wanted to forget but couldn't. Those two realities clashed inside me like opposing waves. And for the first time in a long time, I couldn't tell which one was real. Was I the man adored by millions, or was I the man rejected by one? And which version of me mattered more? I began to realize something that terrified me. Sometimes you can receive endless love from the world and still feel unloved where it matters most. And that emptiness can eat at you in ways that fame and applause can never heal. Because at the end of every performance, after the confetti settles and the fans go home, you're left with yourself. And in those moments, what matters isn't how many people cheered for you. It's whether there's someone who truly knows you, who sees through the perfection, who chooses you even when you're flawed. And I didn't have that anymore. I thought I did. I thought she might be the one. But now, all I had was the echo of her no. I threw myself into work as a way to escape. It's something I've always done. When I don't know how to process my feelings, I push them into rehearsals, into recordings, into hours of practice until my body is too tired to feel. But this time, it didn't work. The music, which had always been my refuge, now felt like a reminder. Every lyric, every note, every performance seemed to echo her absence. And instead of healing me, it broke me more. Because you can't outrun rejection. You can't drown it out with noise. It follows you until you sit with it, until you let it teach you what it came to teach. So I sat with it, and when I did, I realized that her rejection wasn't just about me. It was about her too. About the life she wanted, the choices she was brave enough to make. I had to remind myself that love isn't a reward, and rejection isn't a punishment. It's simply the truth of two people's paths not aligning. And as painful as that truth was, it carried within it a strange kind of respect. Because she could have taken the easier route. She could have said yes and lived a life filled with resentment, compromise, and slow, suffocating sacrifice. But she didn't. She chose honesty over convenience. And that's something I couldn't hate her for. In fact, I admired her even more for it. One evening, when the ache felt heavier than usual, I found myself going back to the first day I met her. I remember how ordinary it all was. No red carpets, no grand introductions, no spotlight, just two people crossing paths in the middle of everyday life. And maybe that's why it struck me so deeply. Because for someone like me, whose every move is usually magnified and celebrated, meeting someone in such a simple, unremarkable moment felt real. And in that ordinariness, there was magic. The kind of magic you don't recognize until later, when you realize that the smallest things can change the biggest parts of your life. She once told me something that I didn't fully understand until after she rejected me. She said, "The kind of love I believe in isn't about being swept off your feet. It's about building something quietly, piece by piece, until one day you realize you're standing inside of it." At the time, I thought I was building that with her. I thought every conversation, every laugh, every shared silence was another brick in that foundation. But what I didn't see was that she wasn't building in the same direction. She was building her own life, one that didn't have room for mine. And maybe that's why it hurt so much, because while I thought we were building together, she knew all along that we weren't. But here's the paradox I found myself in. Even though she rejected me, I couldn't let go of what she taught me. I couldn't erase the way she made me think differently about love, about character, about meaning. I couldn't unhear the words she spoke that carved themselves into my heart. And in some way, that rejection became the very thing that forced me to grow. Because rejection doesn't erase the impact someone has on your life. It just changes the shape of it. And though I couldn't call her mine, I could still carry the lessons she gave me. And maybe, in the end, that's more valuable than a yes would have been. The hardest part, though, was facing the public. Because the world sees everything. They notice changes. They notice when your smile doesn't reach your eyes, when your laughter feels rehearsed, when your performances carry a shadow you can't hide. And I knew they would ask questions. They always do. Are you in love? Are you dating? Are you happy? Questions asked with excitement, but for me, they felt like knives. Because how could I tell the truth? How could I say, yes, I was in love, but she didn't want me back? That kind of honesty doesn't fit into an interview. It doesn't fit into a headline. So I stayed quiet. I carried it silently, performing for the world while breaking inside. But here, in this space, I don't want to stay silent. because silence only keeps the wound open. And I know that somewhere out there, someone is listening who has felt the same way. Someone who gave their heart to another only to be met with rejection. Someone who thought they had found their forever, only to discover it wasn't meant to be. And to that person, I want to say, you're not alone. Rejection doesn't mean you're unworthy. It doesn't mean you're broken. It simply means that this chapter isn't the one that will define you. There are more pages to be written, more stories to unfold, more love waiting in places you haven't even imagined yet. And maybe, just maybe, the rejection you face today is the very thing preparing you for the love you'll find tomorrow. There's something about rejection that doesn't just wound your heart, it rewires the way you move through the world. For weeks after it happened, I noticed how differently I carried myself. I walked into rehearsal rooms and felt the weight of silence more than the weight of music. I stood in front of the mirror, the same mirror I'd faced every day for years. But this time, the reflection staring back at me felt unfamiliar. It wasn't the Jungkook that everyone expected to see, the performer, the fighter, the unshakable dreamer. It was just a man who had asked someone to share his life and had been told no. And that reality, no matter how much I tried to ignore it, followed me everywhere. I kept thinking about how ordinary the moment had been when she said it. No dramatic fight, no raised voices, no storm of emotions, just calm honesty. And in that calmness, I realized something about her strength. It's easy to walk away in anger. It's easy to turn love into blame, but it takes a rare kind of courage to say no with compassion. And that's exactly what she did. She didn't destroy me. She didn't make me feel small. She simply told me the truth. And sometimes the truth is harder to carry than any cruel words ever could be. I remember one particular night when the weight of it all became unbearable. I had finished a long day of practice and returned home, the house quiet, the city lights flickering faintly outside my window. I sat in the darkness, the ring still lying inside the drawer where I had hidden it, and I pulled it out again. I held it in my hand, staring at it, wondering what it meant now. It had been a symbol of my hope, of my certainty, of the future I wanted to build with her. But now, it was just metal and stone, carrying the echo of a promise that would never be spoken. And in that silence, I asked myself, had I been wrong to believe? Had I misread the signs? Or was it simply that love sometimes blooms in one heart but not in another, and no amount of hope can change that? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that rejection wasn't just about her decision. It was also about me, about the man I was, about the life I lived, about the sacrifices and the chaos that came with it. She wasn't wrong when she said she couldn't give me what I needed, because maybe what I needed wasn't something anyone else could give me. Maybe what I needed was to confront the parts of myself. I had ignored the parts that longed for connection but didn't know how to nurture it. The parts that carried insecurities hidden beneath the surface of fame. The parts that wanted love but didn't fully understand how to sustain it. And maybe her rejection was the mirror. I needed to see all of that clearly. In the days that followed, I began to notice small details about myself that I had overlooked before. How often I rushed through conversations, how easily I hid behind work, how I sometimes used success as a shield to avoid vulnerability. I realized that while I had given her my love, I hadn't truly given her my time in the way she might have needed it. Not because I didn't care, but because I was so used to living at the speed of ambition that I forgot love requires presence, not just intention. And maybe that's why her no felt so final, because she saw that part of me before I did, and she knew she couldn't live with it. But as painful as these realizations were, they began to transform me. I started asking myself questions I had never asked before. What does it mean to truly be present for someone? What does it mean to build a life not just around dreams and goals, but around connection? How do you balance ambition with intimacy, public life with private truth, the demands of a career with the quiet needs of the heart? These weren't questions I could answer overnight, but they were questions that shifted the way I thought about everything. And in that shift, I began to see that maybe rejection wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of becoming someone who could love better, deeper, and more honestly in the future. One evening, while sitting in a small cafe, hidden away from the noise of the city, I found myself writing in a notebook. It wasn't lyrics, it wasn't a song, It wasn't meant for anyone else's ears. It was just my heart spilled onto paper. I wrote about the silence after her words, about the heaviness of the ring, about the way my chest tightened every time I thought about her smile. I wrote about the courage it takes to walk away from something you can't commit to. And I wrote about the strange beauty of realizing that even in rejection, there is love, a love that respects the truth, a love that refuses to bind someone in chains they can't carry. And when I looked at those pages, messy and raw, I realized they held a different kind of music, a music made of pain and growth, a music that only comes when you've been broken but refuse to stay shattered. That night, I finally put the ring away for good. Not because I wanted to erase what happened, but because I understood that holding on to it meant holding on to a version of the future that no longer exists. And I didn't want to live trapped in what might have been. I wanted to learn from what was and use it to shape what could be. I wanted to let the rejection transform me, not define me. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of healing. I know some of you might be listening to this and thinking, why share something so personal? Why not keep it hidden, protect yourself, move on quietly? And the truth is, I asked myself the same question, but I realized that silence only deepens wounds. Speaking it out loud, admitting the truth, turning pain into words, that's how you heal. That's how you take back your power from rejection. Because the moment you share it, the moment you let others see your scars, those scars begin to carry meaning. They become reminders not of failure, but of resilience. And I think that's something worth sharing, not just for me, but for anyone who's ever felt the sting of rejection and wondered if they could survive it. There comes a point after rejection when the initial shock fades, but the ache lingers like an echo you can't silence. That's where I found myself as the weeks passed. The sharp sting of her no had dulled into a quieter pain, but it was still there, woven into my daily life, like a shadow trailing me wherever I went. At first, I tried to convince myself that I was moving on, that work and time would wash it away. But late at night, when the world slowed down and the noise fell silent, I knew I hadn't. Because love doesn't leave quickly. It lingers in the smallest moments, in the details that most people overlook, in the memory of a voice, a glance, a laugh that you still hear when no one else is around. I found myself replaying scenes in my head like old film reels. The way she looked at me the first time I made her laugh. The way she tilted her head when she was listening, as if my words mattered more than the world outside. The way her presence somehow made ordinary places feel extraordinary. And the hardest part wasn't that she was gone from my life, it was that she was still alive in my memories. Because rejection doesn't erase the past, it just changes the direction of the future. And I was left standing in the gap between what I'd hoped for and what I now had to accept. But as painful as it was, something unexpected began to happen. I started to notice how rejection was forcing me to see myself in a way I never had before. It was stripping away the illusions I had built about love, about relationships, about what it means to give yourself to someone. It made me ask questions I had never dared to ask. What was I really looking for in love? Was it comfort? Was it validation? Or was it something deeper, something harder, something that required me to confront parts of myself I had hidden away? One night, while sitting alone with those thoughts, I realized that part of the reason her no had hurt so much was because I had tied my worth to her answer. I had put so much of my identity into whether she would say yes that when she didn't, I felt like I had failed. But rejection doesn't mean you're not enough. It doesn't mean you're unworthy. It simply means you weren't what that person needed, just as they weren't what you needed in that moment. And the more I sat with that truth, the more I began to free myself from the weight of shame. It wasn't easy. Healing never is. There were days when I woke up heavy, when I walked into the practice room with a smile plastered on my face while my chest still ached inside. There were nights when I wrote lyrics that I never showed anyone, words too raw, too vulnerable to put into a song yet. But little by little, I began to see how rejection was shaping me. It was teaching me patience. It was teaching me humility. It was teaching me that love isn't just about what you feel, it's about what you're willing to become. And sometimes the person you're becoming requires pain as much as it requires joy. I also realized that rejection, as personal as it feels, is often not just about you. She had her own dreams, her own limits, her own vision of the life she wanted to live. And just as I couldn't force her to fit into mine, she couldn't force herself to give up hers. That's not failure, that's honesty. And in a world that often pressures us to compromise ourselves for the sake of fitting into someone else's expectations, her honesty was something I couldn't hate. In fact, it was something I had to respect, no matter how much it hurt me. So I began to shift my perspective. Instead of seeing her rejection as an ending, I tried to see it as a gift. A painful one, yes, but a gift nonetheless. A gift that reminded me of who I was, of what I still needed to grow into, of the kind of love I wanted to build in the future. A gift that reminded me that love isn't always about possession. Sometimes it's about recognition, recognizing the lessons, recognizing the growth, recognizing the way someone's presence, even if temporary, changes you forever. The more I leaned into that perspective, the more I began to heal. Not by forgetting her, but by honoring what her presence had awakened in me. I realized I didn't need to erase her from my story to move forward. I just needed to rewrite the meaning of her role in it. She wasn't the one who stayed, but she was the one who taught me something invaluable. That rejection isn't the opposite of love, it's a part of it. Because even in her no, there was truth. Even in her rejection, there was respect. And even in the end, there was a kind of love that chose honesty over illusion. And that realization became the turning point. Because once you stop seeing rejection as the door slammed shut and start seeing it as a door leading you to another path, you stop being afraid of it. You stop letting it define you. You begin to see it as a necessary part of becoming the person you're meant to be. And though my heart was still healing, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. There's a moment in healing when you realize that you're no longer just surviving the pain, you're learning how to carry it. That's where I found myself as the days stretched into weeks. The sharp edges of her rejection had softened, but the ache was still there, woven into my routines like a hidden thread. I wasn't waking up every morning crushed by the memory of her words anymore, but I also wasn't free of them. They lived in me quietly, shaping the way I saw myself, the way I approached others, the way I understood love. And maybe that was the point. Maybe pain isn't something you ever fully leave behind. Maybe it's something you integrate, something that becomes part of the story you're telling with your life. I noticed that the world didn't stop just because my heart had broken. Concerts still needed to be performed, interviews still needed to be given, fans still screamed my name with a kind of love that felt unconditional. From the outside, nothing had changed. But on the inside, I was different. I carried her no with me into every room, into every song, into every moment of silence when the lights dimmed and I was left with myself again. And that difference wasn't visible to anyone else, but I felt it deeply. It was as if her rejection had cracked something open in me that I could never close again. There were times I caught myself wondering about her. Did she regret it? Did she think of me at all? Did she ever replay that moment in her head the way I replayed it in mine? I never asked her. And maybe it was better that way. Because some questions don't need answers. Some questions are meant to stay unanswered, teaching you to live with uncertainty, teaching you to let go of control. And as much as I wanted to know what she was thinking, I realized it didn't matter. What mattered was what I chose to do with the truth she had given me. So I began to lean into the lessons. I thought about the way she had admired consistency, the way she had valued presence over performance, the way she had lived her life with quiet integrity. And I asked myself, was I living that way? Or had I been too caught up in the pursuit of perfection, in the chase of dreams, to notice the everyday choices that truly define who we are? The more I reflected, the more I realized how much of myself I had hidden behind the image of Jungkook, the performer. I had become so good at being what the world wanted me to be that I had neglected the practice of becoming who I wanted to be. And maybe, just maybe, that was part of the reason she couldn't say yes. I remember one evening after rehearsal, I found myself sitting on the rooftop of the building, looking out over the city. The air was cool, the lights flickered in the distance, and for the first time in a long while, I let myself breathe without pretending. I let the mask drop, not the stage mask, but the internal one, the mask of strength, of certainty, of control. And in that vulnerable space, I admitted to myself that I was still afraid of not being enough, afraid of being loved only for what I could give, not for who I really was. Afraid that rejection wasn't just a moment, but a reflection of some truth I didn't want to face. And yet, even in that fear, I felt something else. I felt determination. Because the same rejection that had broken me was now pushing me to grow. It was demanding that I stop hiding behind illusions and start living authentically, even if that meant stumbling, even if that meant being rejected again. I began to think differently about the future, not as a series of milestones, concerts, awards, achievements, but as a space to practice becoming the kind of man who doesn't just give love, but understands how to receive it. Becoming the kind of man who isn't afraid of vulnerability, who doesn't mistake ambition for intimacy, who doesn't confuse admiration with connection. And while I didn't have all the answers, I had something better. The willingness to keep asking the questions. One of the hardest realizations was this. I had been so focused on being chosen that I forgot to ask if I was ready to choose too. Not just to choose her, but to choose the life that came with love, the patience, the sacrifice, the slowing down, the being fully present. Love isn't just about finding someone who says yes. It's about being someone who can live out that yes every single day. And maybe that was the biggest gift her rejection gave me. It showed me that I wasn't there yet, that I still had growing to do. That love wasn't about rushing into forever. It was about becoming someone who could sustain it. The more I sat with these realizations, the more I began to feel gratitude alongside the grief. Gratitude that she had been honest with me. Gratitude that she had taught me what she valued. Gratitude that she had forced me to look at myself in ways I had avoided. Because without her, I might have gone on living in illusion, believing that love was something I could secure through passion alone. But now I knew better. Love isn't about securing someone, it's about building with someone. And building requires honesty, presence, and courage. And so, little by little, I began to heal. Not by erasing her, but by honoring the lessons she left me with. Not by pretending I wasn't broken, but by allowing the cracks to become places where light could enter. And as I stood on that rooftop, the city stretching endlessly before me, I whispered something to myself. Not a promise, not a declaration, but a prayer that one day I would be ready. Ready not just to propose again, but to live in a love built on truth, on growth, on authenticity. And until that day came, I would keep becoming. There's a strange quiet that follows the storm of heartbreak. A quiet that doesn't announce itself but settles slowly, like dust after something has shattered. That's where I found myself as time moved on. The raw pain of rejection had softened, not because I had forgotten it, but because my heart was learning to carry it differently. I no longer woke up every morning replaying her words in my head, but they still live somewhere inside me, shaping my thoughts, shaping the way I walk through the world. It was like a scar. You don't feel it every second, but it's there, a reminder of both the wound and the healing. One of the most surprising things I discovered was how rejection didn't just change my relationship with her, it changed my relationship with myself. For so long, I had lived in a world where approval seemed endless. Millions of fans cheering, companies investing in me, media outlets chasing my name. My life was defined by yes. Yes to another performance. Yes to another endorsement. Yes to another stage where I could prove myself. But her no was different. It wasn't about my skills or my career or the image the world saw. It was about me, the man beneath it all. And for the first time, I had to sit with the question, who am I when someone I love says no? That question haunted me in ways I didn't expect. It made me strip away the layers of my identity, one by one. The singer, the performer, the global star. What was left underneath? Was I still enough? And maybe that's the deepest wound of rejection. It doesn't just take away the future you imagine with someone. It shakes the foundation of how you see yourself. But in that shaking, I began to notice something I had overlooked for years. I realized that my worth could never be built on someone else's answer. Not on the world's yes, and not on her no. My worth had to come from a place deeper than both. A place untouched by applause or rejection. The more I reflected, the more I saw how easily I'd confused being admired with being loved. They are not the same. Admiration looks at what you do. Love looks at who you are. Admiration fades when the performance ends. Love stays when the curtain falls. And as much as the world admired me, what I longed for was love, the kind that doesn't need a stage, the kind that doesn't demand perfection, the kind that sees you clearly in your flaws and still chooses you. Her rejection didn't mean I was unworthy of that kind of love. It simply meant she wasn't the one to give it. And though that truth hurt, it also freed me. There were days when I found myself journaling again, pouring out thoughts I had never put into words before. I wrote about the way fame can trick you into believing you're always wanted, until one person shows you that wanting isn't the same as choosing. I wrote about how easy it is to build walls around yourself, even when millions of people claim to know you. I wrote about the ache of realizing that being known by the world doesn't matter if you're not known by the one person you wish would understand you most. Those words weren't meant for anyone else, but as I filled page after page, I realized I was finally beginning to see myself clearly. And maybe that was the beginning of real healing. I remember one night in particular when I sat by the window watching the rain slide down the glass. The city outside looked blurred, almost dreamlike, as if the world itself was reminding me that nothing stays sharp forever. And in that moment, I whispered something I hadn't said out loud before. Thank you. Thank you to her for being honest. Thank you for not pretending. Thank you for showing me that love isn't something you can hold on to by force. That gratitude didn't erase the pain, but it transformed it. It turned the story from one of loss into one of growth. It reminded me that even in rejection, there is a gift if you're willing to receive it. The more I embraced that gratitude, the more I noticed how differently I moved through my life. I started paying attention to the people around me in ways I hadn't before. I noticed the way my team worked tirelessly behind the scenes. I noticed the way fans poured their hearts into messages, letters, and art. I noticed the way my family supported me quietly, without ever asking for anything in return. And I realized that love, in its truest form, had been around me all along. Maybe not romantic love, not the kind I had been chasing, but real love nonetheless. The kind that shows up daily, the kind that sustains you when your heart feels empty, the kind that whispers, "You are not alone," even when you feel like you are. And so, slowly, I began to rebuild. Not by erasing her memory, not by pretending I was fine, but by choosing to see her no as a turning point rather than an ending. She had closed one door, yes, but in doing so, she had opened countless others' doors into deeper self-awareness, doors into greater appreciation for the love already present in my life, doors into the possibility of a future I couldn't yet imagine. And though I didn't know what that future would hold, for the first time since her rejection, I began to believe again that it was worth waiting for. As more time passed, I realized that healing is not a straight line, it's a circle. You think you've moved on, and then a song, a scent, or even the way the light falls on a quiet evening pulls you right back into the memory. That's what happened to me one night when I walked past the small street cafe, the kind of place she loved. I caught a glimpse of the warm lights inside, the laughter of people sharing stories over coffee, and suddenly it felt like I was back there again, sitting across from her, listening to her talk about the things she believed in. For a moment, my chest tightened, the old ache resurfacing, reminding me that wounds don't vanish just because you will them to. They resurface again and again until you learn how to live with them. But this time, something was different. Instead of drowning in the pain of what I had lost, I found myself smiling softly at the memory. Because even though her rejection had hurt, the moments we shared weren't fake. They were real. They had shaped me, taught me, moved me, and even if they didn't lead to forever, they were still worth remembering. I realized then that love doesn't have to end with bitterness. It doesn't have to be erased just because it didn't last. Sometimes love can be honored in memory, even if it couldn't survive in reality. That realization shifted something in me. For so long, I had carried rejection like a wound, but now I began to see it as a scar. And scars don't just remind you of pain, they remind you of survival. They remind you of the battles you fought and the strength you discovered in the process. I began to see her, no, not as the thing that broke me, but as the thing that revealed how deeply I could love, how vulnerable I was willing to be, how brave it was to open my heart fully even when I knew it could be crushed. And that realization gave me a strange kind of peace. I also began to notice how differently I approached the people around me. Rejection had stripped away the illusion of invincibility I once carried. It had humbled me, softened me. I started listening more, paying attention to the small things, practicing patience in ways I hadn't before. Because I didn't want to make the same mistake twice. I didn't want to give love without presence, without consistency, without the daily choices that make someone feel truly seen. And as much as it hurt to admit, I knew that if I had been given a yes, I might never have learned that lesson. Her no was the very thing that taught me how to love better. One night, sitting alone in my room with only the soft hum of the city outside, I thought about the irony of it all. How rejection, something so painful, could also become the teacher I didn't know I needed. It showed me that love isn't just about desire, about wanting someone so badly. You're willing to give everything. It's about alignment, about timing, about two people walking in the same direction with the same willingness to build together. Without that, no amount of love can survive. And that's a truth I carry with me now, a truth I wish I had understood earlier. But here's the part that surprised me most. Out of all the pain, the growth, the reflection, what I discovered was hope. Not hope that she would come back, not hope that her no would someday turn into a yes, but hope that somewhere in the future, there would be someone whose yes would mean more than I could ever imagine. Someone who wouldn't just accept my love, but would return it fully, with the same depth, the same commitment, the same daily choices. And until that day came, I knew I had work to do. Work on myself, work on becoming, work on living authentically in the present instead of chasing an imagined future. I began to carry her words differently too. I can't give you what you need. For so long, those words felt like a rejection of me, of my worth, of everything I had to offer. But now I began to see them as a reflection of her honesty, her boundaries, her truth. She wasn't saying I was unworthy. She was saying she couldn't walk that path with me. And that difference mattered. Because sometimes the most loving thing someone can do is step away rather than promise something they can't give. And in her honesty, I found a kind of respect that outlived the heartbreak. So as I looked out at the city lights that night, I whispered another quiet thank you. Not just for the love we almost shared, but for the rejection that shaped me. For the no that became a mirror, for the heartbreak that became a teacher, for the silence that became a space where I could finally hear my own heart clearly. And with that gratitude came peace, the kind of peace that tells you it's okay to let go, it's okay to move forward, it's okay to believe that the story isn't over just because one chapter ended. Because here's what I've learned. Rejection is not the opposite of love. It's part of it. It's the part that tests you, refines you, prepares you. It's the part that strips away illusions so you can build something real when the time is right. And though I never thought I'd say this, I'm grateful for her no. Because without it, I might never have discovered the strength, the clarity, and the hope I carry now. The longer I carried her rejection, the more I realized it was no longer just about her. It was about the man I was becoming because of it. At first, all I could see was the pain, the emptiness, the sense of loss. But as time went on, I started to notice how it had sharpened me, softened me, and shaped me all at once. It taught me to look inward in ways I had avoided before. It forced me to ask harder questions about myself, about love, about what it means to truly give and receive. And perhaps most importantly, it gave me a different kind of courage, the courage to be vulnerable without the guarantee of being accepted. There were days when I caught myself wondering what my life would have been like if she had said yes. Would I be happier now? Would the ache in my chest be gone? Would I have found the sense of peace I had been searching for? But the more I thought about it, the more I understood that sometimes the answers we think we want aren't the ones that would actually set us free. Because love built on hesitation is not love at all. A yes born out of fear or guilt or compromise would never have given me the life I was dreaming of. It would only have delayed the heartbreak. And deep down, I think she knew that too. Her no, as painful as it was an act of honesty. And honesty is a kind of love, even when it hurts. She didn't pretend. She didn't lead me on. She didn't give me half of herself. She gave me the truth. And in a world where so much is built on appearances and performance, that truth was something rare. It was something I had to respect, even if I couldn't embrace it at first. The rejection also made me more aware of the illusions I had been living in. For years, I had mistaken attention for intimacy, applause for connection, success for fulfillment. But none of those things could fill the quiet of an empty room. None of those things could replace the feeling of being chosen by one person who knows you completely and still says yes. Her no showed me the difference. It revealed the gap between the life I was living and the life I truly wanted. And in that gap, I began to see the work I still had to do. I remember one afternoon when I sat with my closest friend and finally said the words out loud. She rejected me. It felt strange to hear it spoken, almost like it belonged to someone else's story. But the moment I said it, I felt lighter. Because there's power in naming the truth. There's power in admitting the thing you're most afraid of. And once it's spoken, it no longer owns you. That conversation reminded me that vulnerability is not weakness, it's the beginning of freedom. And in that freedom, I began to see that rejection was not a dead end. It was a doorway into deeper connection with myself, a doorway into greater understanding of what I value, a doorway into a future I couldn't yet see, but one I trusted would come if I kept walking forward. Because rejection doesn't mean you've lost your chance at love. It just means you're being redirected toward the love that's truly meant for you. And the more I embraced that perspective, the more I began to find peace in the waiting. I also found myself reflecting on the kind of partner I wanted to be someday. Not the image of perfection, not the untouchable idol, but the man who could sit in silence and still make someone feel safe. The man who could choose presence over distraction, who could listen more than he spoke, who could love not through grand gestures alone, but through daily, steady choices. And though I wasn't there yet, I knew I was on the path. Her no had set me on it, and for that, I couldn't resent her anymore. As the weeks turned into months, I began to notice that the ache was no longer as heavy. It was still there, yes, but it had changed shape. It was no longer the sharp sting of rejection. It had become a quiet reminder, a scar that whispered, "You are capable of loving deeply, and you are capable of surviving when love doesn't go your way." And that reminder gave me hope. Hope that one day, when the right person came along, I would be ready. Ready not just to propose, but to live out the yes that truly mattered. So if you ask me now what I carry from that rejection, I would tell you this. I carry gratitude. Gratitude for the truth she gave me. Gratitude for the lessons I learned. Gratitude for the way it shaped me into someone who understands love in a deeper way. Because sometimes the no you dread becomes the gift you didn't know you needed. And though it may take time, that gift can transform you in ways you never imagined.